meeting all of you. I would like to thank Nazemi for this opportunity for interacting with you. And normally when I speak about a subject, and I am not the subject I normally speak about. So I find this difficult to integrate my own story with what I am about to present to you. But it so happens that the story of my life has taken me in a particular direction, and I will try to take you along the steps of what I have learned and why I will be reaching certain conclusions which I will be presenting to you. Let's say that I refer to myself as the protagonist in this story. It's easier. And the protagonist's story begins when he comes out onto the stage of life, armed with a prestigious degree, unbounded optimism, confidence, no small ego either, and politically completely naive. So the first thing to go when I entered the factory was the ego, because I realized that I knew virtually nothing. I was a technologist, which is a glorified word for an engineer. And the engineer is actually the fellow who's to help the engine driver by tending to the steam engine. So that was that. So the ego went, and this was in a Fordist factory, which manufactured vehicles. And I understood that a Fordist factory is a vast assemblage where men are actually subordinate to machines, which are dedicated to mass production. And actually, unlike what most people who are not in technology believe, you hardly use 5% of everything that you've ever learned in the workplace. So 95% of the potential knowledge that you have is really unutilized in a mass production workplace. Now imagine the potential that is unused in humanity when it comes to technology. If we could harness that 95% for doing the things that society really needs. This occurred to me at a young age. But there was an even more drastic understanding, as it were, which is that the Fordist factory system is essentially a humanly constructed prison in space and time. And this is a startling conclusion for a young mind. I'm talking of myself at the age of 23. And I decided I didn't want to be part of that. So if you put a person in a cage, and the cage keeps moving around on the back of a truck, the person is no more, still not free, although he is moving in space. It's only an illusion of freedom. The same thing is if a person is caught in a debt situation, which is what we find happening all around the world today, that the younger people are starting their life in debt. It's also a form of prison, if you realize, because that person has to now work for 25 or 30 years, paying off the debt which has been incurred at a young age already. So there is a loss of freedom. Since I didn't want to be a part of that, the question which arose is, what is existential freedom? And what is the meaningful life really to be all about? So, full of these kinds of rebellious thoughts, the protagonist then decided to make a drastic change and become an activist. Phase 2. Now, I was lucky that there were a number of friends of mine who were also similarly inclined, let's say. And I have only this very grainy picture of those years. I'm talking the late 70s. This is when the house that you see behind was something that we had built. We were all mad, to put it frankly. But many of these people later went on to also become academics. So we were academics in quite a different mode. At least 4 of the people that you see over here, including on top, went on to become academics. Now the work that we did was actually related to the environment. This is the late 70s I'm talking of. In an area which was very backward part of the country, which was very rich in terms of mineral resources and so on, right? And full of very poor people, tribals, and a situation like that. And we did environmental planning followed by environmental education at that point in time. And it was heartbreaking because most of us came from a background in technology, and we realized that this was the second aspect of technology which was not understood. Technology can produce good things. It also produces very many bad things for people who are unable to cope with it. So that was the next stage of learning, as it were. Also, that centralized development created national goods and imposed local costs on people who are not really either responsible for that or capable of dealing with it. Also, then we realized that it is important to have a local history and a local narrative which explains to people how is it that they are forced to bear the burden of these costs. So there was this destructive aspect of technology on the environment, also on the larger society. The next learning also was that much of this is powered by energy. Energy is really at the core of it, and this took me to the next stage, as it were, in my learning, which had to do actually with energy when I became an academic. And I explored this relationship between energy, environment, and technology. And it was startling because here was the possibility, this was in the late 90s, I was an academic by then, I moved away from activism. And the technological transformation of what are called resources into energy is what really keeps the whole system going in that sense. And this was around the time when the whole debate on climate change really was taking place at a global level. Now, one of the lessons understood from the previous phase also was this, that there is a moral core to development. And this is something that development should not be producing bad things for people, which unfortunately it is doing in very large quantities. And the moral core of development also has to include, not only as several people, several of my predecessors have said, non-violence in action, but also truth in thought is a very important component. And I'm very glad that one of the people had Mahatma Gandhi over there, because these two values are very important to him. Which brings me then to the last phase of my life, which is as a policy person, had to do with climate change and energy. And I realized that the conceptual confusion which was there when I was an activist and I saw how development was portrayed and understood by ordinary people, there was also a conceptual confusion in the academic world about how to deal with these issues. I don't think it's really gone away even now. Although we have terms like sustainable development or eco-socialism and so on. But the conceptual confusion still exists. The academic world also is, I'm talking of the standard academic world and not your kind of academic endeavor. There are three kinds of academic institutions: private universities, universities descended from monasteries, and public universities. And each one of them has a smell associated with its origins. The private university is essentially like a factory. The monastic university lives in a half-dream world, which is semi-religious in its pseudo-religious, I should say. And the state-funded university has a smell of bureaucracy associated with it. I'm being devastatingly frank, but I have to share with the young audience what the academic world glorified is all about. And then I became a policy person. And in that I had to work also with government people at all kinds of levels. And I understood that even within government, there are people, I used to joke with them, they were my colleagues, but I would say, we use the term government machinery, and it's very apt, because government has neither a mind, nor a heart, nor a soul. And we would all laugh about it, because they understood that this was the truth about it. But governments are what we have to live with in practice, in a democracy, and shape them to our purposes. And unfortunately, with this realization comes the whole notion of where are we heading in terms of climate change. What we are facing up to is droughts on a massive scale, floods on a global scale. Now we are thinking of global scale. Sea level rise all over the world, forest fires all over the world, and these are things that are happening from year to year, and they're increasing in both frequency and ferocity. Cyclones. A cyclone can have 100,000 times the energy of a nuclear device. So, what are the ultimate recommendations for action that arise out of this? Since I'm talking to a young audience. There are things we can do. Preserve natural forest grasslands, accelerate renewable energy, shift towards electrical transportation systems, both private and public, move towards organic agriculture, conserve energy and materials locally. These are areas that today there is a consensus on. But the last thing I want to say also, to bring to your attention, is that as far as I am concerned, having examined the evidence, it is no longer possible to hold the line at 2 degrees centigrade. 30th November, all the leaders of the world and their people will be meeting in Paris. And I still, because of my commitment to speaking out the truth in public, I still maintain 2 degrees is no longer possible. We are headed for a world of irreversible climate change. And this is what that world is going to look like. Australia is the dead zone. You can see what happens to South America, Africa. And this is created by a artist. And he has a sense of humor. He calls Greenland the new world. You can see what happens. This is what 6-degree world looks like, and this is where we are headed. So I have this moral commitment to the next generation. I want to tell you that over the next 100 or 150 years, this is where we are going to head for. Unless we decide. This is the pessimism of thought, but we have to now develop the optimism of will in order to not let this globally. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Sanjeev. I understand not every presentation on every particular topic can be ended on a light line, so I understand that. I like the final words about the optimism of will, though. Thank you for the presentation very much. Thank you for this, if I may say, scary picture. Do we have a question or two in the audience? There is a hand up there.
Petra, Slovenia, WEX. I have actually 2 questions. I hope they will be short enough, if I may take the stage. So,
you try, please make them short.
One question is, we know that next year it's the global conference on climate, and it's a historical, important conference.
This year?
Yes, sorry, this year, in December, of course. What do you think? Will the influencers, will the leader come to a global conclusion, to a policy paper on what is needed for our planet? Will they come to an agreement? So I'm asking for your opinion about that. As a policy person and activist in the future, from the past.
What I think is that whatever consensus they arrive at is actually irrelevant. Because in 2014 we've reached 400 ppm, where the stabilization temperature is well above 2 degrees. And the entire climate debate has been this. If you cross 2 degrees, then the nature feedback cycle itself starts becoming more and more prominent, the positive feedback cycle in nature. And then you can't stop it. And nature is much larger than anything that we do as humanity. The sun puts in about something like 13,000 times as much energy as all of humanity produces in a year. And the sun is going to be powering the heating of the earth. So there is absolutely no comparison. Nature is going to teach us a message. So all our leaders put together with all their advisors are irrelevant. It's actually bad economics rather than good science which is driving all this. Very sorry to say, but that's okay. I hope it answers something of your question.
Yeah, partially, yes.
I'm sorry, we'll be having time only for one question right now, but there will be opportunity. Thank you for the question, Petra. Sanjeev, thank you for your presentation. Thank you for your answer. And thank you for this, what was inspiring and shocking, probably, at the same time. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you.